What if I told you your group practice didn't fail because of you, but because the rules of independent mental health care are being rewritten in real time? Group practice used to be the escape plan. Now, for a lot of clinicians, it's the thing that traps them because the game changed while we were building it. Insurance companies used to be just the payers. Now, they're the competitors too, with balance sheets. They deny your claims in the morning and poach your clinicians in the afternoon through the platforms they own. That's not a market, that's a trap. So if your practice feels like it's dying, that isn't bad luck, it's a predictable outcome of a rigged environment. And here's the hot take. What most clinicians call burnout isn't burnout. It's moral injury. And calling it burnout is like calling a broken bone tired. It's Dr. Colleen Long, psychologist, founder, and very unwilling expert in what happens when a practice collapses under a system like this. This is part 3 of the Autopsy of a Practice series. Part 1 was the rise, part 2 was the fall, part 3 is the beginning of the repair. Today I'm going to recap the 1,000 cuts quickly, the financial, operational, administrative, culture, leadership, fear, all that stuff that drains our practices. But the real point is what those cuts do to us, because this wasn't me not being resilient enough. This was a system forcing impossible choices until integrity itself started to bleed. If that hits something in your body, you're in the right episode. Let's get into it. Welcome to Off the Chair, the podcast where clinicians stop playing by the rules, push back on the system, and say what everyone else is thinking. I'm Dr. Colleen Long, psychologist, 7-figure group practice owner, and unapologetically calling BS on the burnout culture of this field. This isn't your typical self-care tips and gratitude journal kind of show. We're talking real talk, from the chaos of building a private practice to the mental load of being the strong one all the time. You'll hear behind-the-scenes truths about leadership, boundaries, messy growth, identity shifts, and what happens when therapists start dreaming beyond the chair. If you're over the toxic positivity, the culture building, the done pretending you love every client, and secretly wondering, is this all there is? You're our people. Let's burn the rule book, get loud, and get off the chair. In today's part 3, I'm going to summarize those cuts that we talked about in part 2, and then I'm naming the system that caused them. My hope is that you learn faster than I did, that you avoid a lot of the mistakes, and that you build something that leads to freedom, true freedom, even if that freedom has a different look now. And if you're in your own slow bleed right now, I want you to hear this clearly. You aren't failing. You're surviving inside a game that is increasingly designed for independent practices and owners to lose. Insurance companies don't just reimburse us anymore. They've become our competitors. Through vertical integration, they've built sister companies and provide arms that are the practices, packaged in sexy tech platforms, massive networks, and scale we're now forced to compete with. They have more capital, more infrastructure, better fee schedules, and lobbying power to rewrite the playing field, while we're still trying to get a human on the phone about a denied claim. So if you want the full in the trenches version of the 1,000 cuts, the long list, the blow by blow, all the emotional voyeurism or schadenfreude you can take, that is in part 2. And I encourage you to go back and listen to that and my experience. Today, I'm going to summarize them fast, just enough to orient us, because part 3 isn't really about the cuts. It's more about the repair. So here they are briefly. We have, as clinicians now, the financial cuts. So 1, we just never get a raise, which is insane in any field. If you told someone that they were going to go into a field where they would never get a raise, and sometimes a demotion. So the financial cuts, the reimbursement never rising while costs explode. The operational cuts, so there's billing chaos, there's turnover, there's generational differences in work ethic, there's delays, denials, clawbacks, systems built to purposely exhaust you. There's administrative cuts. There is quiet quitting and double dipping and all sorts of administrative burden that we have to deal with in ways that employers of the past did not. This new remote landscape, while good for so many of us, has also created a lot of challenges. The hiring and the culture cuts post-COVID, there are VC-fueled fractured teams, the leadership cuts I owned, my own mistakes with abdicating versus delegating and not really understanding what delegation looked like, how to truly interview and understand if someone gets it, wants it, and has the capacity to do something. And the fear cuts, the reviews you can't ethically respond to, the board risk, the legal exposure, the CEO level liability without CEO level infrastructure or protection. Those cuts contributed to the slow bleed and the death of the practice. Dr. Colleen Long, psychologist, accidental CEO, and a clinician in recovery from moral injury and the burnout it left behind. So in our Autopsy of a Practice 3-part series, part 1 can be seen as the rise. Part 2 can be seen as the fall. Part 3 is the repair. And the point of this is to help other clinicians who are likely going through this, their own personal burnout story, and wondering how they got themselves into this mess. And all they ever did was aim to be helpful to other people. And more importantly, how do they get themselves out of this? And that's what Off the Chair is all about. So you can survive a lot when you believe there's a way out. You can survive bad hires. You can survive a cash flow crunch. You can survive a season of burnout. But what you can't survive is realizing the exit is gone and there is no way out. Because when your house is tied to the business loan, once the clinicians you trained disappear, and all of their patients and the state board are waiting for the hundreds of unfinished reports. Once insurance companies become your competitors, you're not running a practice anymore. You're trapped inside of a cage. And that's what I need to autopsy next. So many of us clinicians hit a point after practicing for a while in solo practice or maybe working for an employer. The longer we stay in the field, we start to want something that feels almost radical freedom, or at least a different way to live inside this work. After enough years of trading hours for dollars, holding trauma all day and charting all night, you start to feel the ceiling. Financially, sure, but also in your bones. So we all start to do what we were taught was next in this evolution, which is we build group practices, something bigger than us, something that doesn't collapse if we take a day off, something that can earn without our nervous system being the engine every single hour. And for a long time, group practice was sold as the path for freedom, the path to build a legacy for yourself, especially as you got older and maybe wanted to become more of a parent or work on your marriage or God knows what else you wanted to do outside of being a clinician. So group practice was sort of sold as a path to freedom. We also are time and time told again that if we want to sell our practices, we have to demonstrate that if something were to happen to us tomorrow, our practices could still go on running. And that is not an easy feat, as you'll see. So for a long time, group practice was sold as the path out of the chair. Build a team, build a legacy, build a business that eventually gives back to you after everything you've poured into becoming good at this. That promise was real in the old game. But today, there's a much more darker undercurrent that we're dealing with. The rules have changed, and not by accident. Zooming out, this isn't only happening in mental health. This has been happening with physicians and other clinician disciplines for decades, but much larger than that. What we're experiencing is a microcosm of something much bigger playing out everywhere in any job or discipline. We're living through a generational shift in which success is changing. What defines earning a living and what defines livelihood is shifting. So most of us grew up in this sort of old story, which is you go to high school, you graduate high school, you go to college, you graduate college, you get your master's degree, maybe even doctoral degree, You earn that professional degree or certification, become a doctor or a lawyer or some other profession, and you'll be safe at the top of that food chain, never having to worry about where the next paycheck comes from because you are the boss, usually. And unfortunately, that story is unraveling right before our very eyes in real time. So, technology and AI are rapidly redefining who survives. And even people like Bill Gates are openly predicting that AI will take over large parts of medicine and other expert roles within the decade. So, the new power class is no longer physicians and attorneys, it's creators, it's entrepreneurs, tech builders, people who are nimble enough to keep reinventing what's useful and keep reinventing themselves. The world is rewarding flexibility, creativity, and leverage, not just academic endurance anymore or clinical grind in a practice. So here we are, the last vestige of a generation trained to win at a game that is no longer being played. We are the proverbial tails of the human species. There is no longer a use for what we do, and eventually we will become extinct as a result. In our field, that new game is being rewritten by payers with a financial interest in consolidating care, controlling networks, and pushing independent clinicians out of practice. I'm one of thousands who have tried to build a freedom practice in this landscape and watched it turn into a cage. I was trying to play by the rules that don't exist anymore against opponents who get to rewrite them mid-match. Opponents with layers of infrastructure designed to absorb risk, hide cracks, and keep the machine moving no matter what. Independent practices don't have that padding. We are the padding. As I know, and many others listening who have bootstrapped any sort of practice or business, you don't just wear the clinician's hat. You wear every hat. You are HR, you are hiring, you are firing, you are interviewing, you are retention, you are the culture builder, you are marketing, you are reputation management, you are patient quality control. You are the one who comes up with the surveys and puts the SOP in place to make sure that patients are happy with the services that you provide at the timeline that you provide them. You become billing, accounting, IT, recruiting, clinical quality, crisis management, compliance. You're expected to deliver Fortune 500 level performance with a solo practitioner nervous system and a calendar full of patients still waiting on you. And that's the trap. The thing that makes us strong in the early years, being able to hold on to everything, is the exact thing that makes us crash. Because no human can be the therapist, the CEO, the COO, the CFO, the biller, the compliance officer, and the emotional shock absorber forever. So the collapse is not a character flaw, it's physics. It was a mismatch between what the system demands from independent clinicians and what any one person can sustainably carry. So before we talk about repair, I think it's important to name what it is. In my role as an assessment psychologist or testing psychologist, we have to first come up with the diagnosis. And some people don't like that. Some people don't want to attribute labels. They believe we're all just humans here. But if we can label something, if we can diagnose something, then we can treat it. And so that is really what I want to help you with here, is looking at what was going on and how it was treated. How did I repair and how can you repair if you're going through something similar? So I think as I was going through it, there wasn't a lot of reflection. There wasn't a lot of, oh my gosh, this is a crisis. I just got up every day and just kept grinding. That's all I can explain. There wasn't a lot of sleep that was happening because I knew that the more hours I could stay awake, the more I could sort of try and bail us out, or at least that's what I thought. But here's what I didn't understand while this was happening. The cuts that I talked about, there was something bigger going on under the surface beyond just burnout. And I think burnout is a phrase we hear all too common, especially when it comes to healthcare and clinicians. But there was something deeper happening, which is this concept called moral injury. So you have micro traumas that are happening just in terms of burnout. And then you have this moral injury that is also simultaneously occurring. And I want to focus on some of the thought leaders in our field when it comes to moral injury to explain how this is different than burnout. Pause. This part matters. One of the biggest injuries in clinician life isn't the workload, it's the isolation. There's a mountain of research showing that social support and a sense of belonging aren't nice extras, they're protective factors. People with stronger perceived support have better mental health, lower stress, and more resilience across the board. We don't heal in private caves, we heal in community. And here's another layer. Helping other people actually improves your well-being. Pro-social behavior, even small acts like sharing something that helps a friend, is linked to higher life satisfaction and lower distress. It's literally how humans regulate. So here's my ask. It's not just for metrics. If you're doing okay right now, but you know a colleague who's quietly drowning, send them this episode. Text it, DM it, tag them. Because word of mouth and social norms are how ideas spread in real life. It's how we stop thinking we're alone. You might be fine, but your share might be the moment someone else comes up for air. I want to slow this down because this distinction saves people. Burnout is capacity failure. Your workload exceeds your resources for too long. You get tired, cynical, detached. You fantasize about quitting or moving to a cabin or becoming a florist or Uber driver. But moral injury is integrity failure, not because you're unethical or lack integrity, but because the system keeps putting you in a double bind where any option costs you your values. So every denial wasn't just annoying, it was this moral dilemma. Do I keep seeing this patient knowing I'm not going to ever get paid, or do I stop care and violate what I believe about access? Every prior auth delay wasn't just paperwork, it was a forced compromise. Do I follow clinical judgment or follow the insurer's algorithm so that the patient can keep services? Every EMR rollout and compliance avalanche was another betrayal. I was trained to heal humans, and now half my day is proving to a corporation that I'm allowed to do it. So no, this isn't us not being resilient enough or experiencing something as simple as burnout. Burnout just says I'm exhausted. Maybe I need to do some yoga or take a nap or go on vacation. Moral injury says I'm being made to betray what I came here to do. And when that happens long enough, your body starts tagging your work as danger. Not stress, danger. Every cut wasn't just logistical, it was moral. Every denial made me choose between care and payroll. Every prior auth delay turned my clinical judgment into a negotiation with a faceless algorithm. Every review I couldn't respond to asked me to accept public shame as professionalism. This very thing pitted me against my clinicians, the clinicians who also were struggling with their own ethical imperatives. And I became the vicarious employer of the insurance company saying, no, you got to do it this way, or you got to document, or you can't see them anymore because they've run out of sessions. That's moral injury. Being trapped in a system that makes integrity feel like a liability. Here's the simplest way I can put it. Burnout is being exhausted by the job. Moral injury is being betrayed by it. Wendy Dean talks a lot about moral injury and reframes clinician distress in a way that hit me like a gong. Dean goes on to say that when legitimate authorities in a high-stakes system repeatedly force you to act against your oath or punish you for trying to live it, your distress is not a personal weakness. It's an appropriate human response to betrayal. So no, this is not you being not resilient enough. This is you being put over and over in situations where ethical care and financial survival are incompatible. After enough moral injury and burnout, your system doesn't see work as just hard or even grueling. It sees work as a threat. It's when burnout stops being a phase in your professional career and it becomes an identity shift. And for me, it did not feel like, wow, I'm wiped out. It started to feel like I would open my laptop and my heart would spike. I would get a notification and my pulse would drop. It's not laziness when you start turning away from work, then it's conditioning. Your nervous system doesn't speak your language. It doesn't speak English for me. It doesn't read my value system. It doesn't care that I'm high achieving or that I worked so hard for this license my whole life. It speaks in pattern recognition. Every time I sat down to do work, something bad would happen. I would open my laptop in the morning to a resignation email. And it wasn't just a thank you for the opportunity. It was usually a deeper intention by that employee to emotionally hurt me. There was something that had built up over time, probably by way of having to deal with so much bureaucracy, that I started to feel like the man for so many of our employees and clinicians, and they started to lose the difference. So I would open my laptop in the morning to a resignation, or I would get a text that says, "Do you have time to talk?" It was never about what a great job I was doing or thank you for holding it all together. It was usually always some really bad news that was happening in what felt like day after day without any escape. Every day it was a claim batch was rejected. There's a patient furious, demanding their report, showing up on premise. There's an employee now demanding triple damages because they weren't paid out at the rate they felt they were entitled to. Another portal frozen at 2 a.m. Another insurance payer who had moved the goalpost, changing its name and changing all the administrative burden to a new batch of administrative burden your team would need to now engage in and do it by tomorrow, or you've not met timely filing limits. So your body starts to anticipate danger before your brain can even form a thought. And that's trauma physiology. It's not a personality problem. Wasn't like all of a sudden after 30 to 40 years of just being a really, really hard worker, I was all of a sudden this just lazy person that was looking for excuses out. It could not physiologically do this job anymore. Here's one element that made this all the more challenging was that I was utterly alone. I didn't just feel alone. I was alone. There's all these jokes like when you're a CEO, it's lonely at the top, blah, blah, blah. There's some truth to that. When you run any sort of business, there is a certain modicum of decorum you have to maintain. For your employees, you have to make sure that they feel good and they feel safe working at your practice. And that was, I think, part and parcel why many clinicians don't talk about the challenges that they face back then and even today, because most are still in it. They're still trying to encourage everybody like, you got it, guys. This is still good. We're still doing it. We're still doing it. And so you don't hear a lot of people actively talking about the struggles that they face while actively trying to run the business whose livelihood depends on it. And that makes sense. But it also kept me very alone. There was no other person that was like, whoa, this is not for us anymore, And I think about people that are victims in the Me Too movement, right? So while this injury that happens to them psychologically and physically at times is horrific, somebody finally stood up and named it. And then another person said, that happened to me too, and me too, and me too, and me too. And there was healing in the Me Too movement because we are not a species that is meant to operate in isolation. We are a culture that is aligned when we are together, when we are a tribe, when we feel sameness, connection, that we're part of this bigger cosmic fabric. And that couldn't have been further from where I felt at the most challenging time in my life. The 2 a.m. sleepless nights, there was no support group for that. There was no podcast to turn to. There was no biz bestie. You almost become like a pariah. People don't want to necessarily be around you or even associate themselves with you. The worse things get. In major corporations where there's a large infrastructure, even when that CEO is dealing with a new pain point every day, a new fire, there's still a team of people that are hired to help them put that fire out and to also provide that moral support of this is the same problem every CEO faces and, we're going to survive this. We're going to do okay and you're doing okay. There is none of that, especially in the group private practice world. As our house is on the line, quite literally, to hold payroll, there's no team of employees that are saying, hey, appreciate all that you're doing and listen, I'm gonna reduce my hours, or I don't entirely need all of this. I can work at half pay right now. It reminds me of that scene in It's a Wonderful Life with George Bailey when the bank is collapsing and that lady says, well, I don't need the $3.43. You can have that right now. And he kisses her and jumps over the counter. It's like, I would have died for anybody to see my humanity in all of this. But instead, what happened was I would get emails from sometimes our clinicians, the very mental health clinicians that are out there supposedly at the top of empathy, helping people. And company-wide would say all of the places where they believed I had faltered, made a mistake, what they would have done differently if they were the boss. I remember one clinician criticizing the termination of an employee. And it demonstrated to me just how little employees can understand about what the pains and challenges are of the owner, operator, founder, whatever you want to call it, because this particular employee had resigned. It wasn't our decision at all. And we had given a very sort of short message that they are moving on to they're moving on to greener pastures and wish them well and all of this. And they had just assumed, I guess, through this sort of coup that was now forming, that it was all the big bad me who had decided to let everybody go. I do think that when you have some people that are unhappy with the way things are going, they are looking for the same thing I was looking for, which was support. Hey, are you dealing with this too? Are you dealing with this too? They band it together and created really sort of a coup to extrapolate things that weren't really happening, to spread rumors, gossip. And I think when people are uncertain about things and fear prevails, anger is that secondary emotion that comes right behind all of that. And so instead of these emails of like, hey, is everything okay here? Is my job safe? It was a lot of finger pointing and blame and very little support on the other side of that. I remember being in a mastermind group, and the whole point of getting in this mastermind was really for the group therapy aspect. I was thinking if I could find other group practice owners, I could probably find other people that were dealing with some of the same industry shifts that I was experiencing. And maybe they had an answer for this, or maybe they are doing something that I hadn't thought of. And unfortunately, really, it was a lot of people sort of counting their money, all getting together like, it's going great. And I don't know, maybe it was because they were living in a different part of the country, or many of them were just starting off. And regardless, there was not a lot of people that were struggling or willing to admit that they were struggling. And so I remember this coach being brought into our mastermind group, and the coach was going to work with us and our employees to talk about how to tell them exactly what we needed from them. And I was so far away from that. I literally was like, is this person actually working for me? Or are they billing me and they're working for 3 other people? Like, that's where I was. And at the same time, opening an email from a clinician who started off in a really sort of threatening tone. I mean, these were things that were happening every single day. Surprisingly, some of the harshest voices I experienced were the very mental health clinicians hired to help people who needed empathy and compassion. And these people assumedly understood trauma and power dynamics until they were inconvenienced. So it becomes much easier for those in the audience to criticize while you're out there marred with the blood and the sweat and the tears of the actual fight. And that compounded the issue that I experienced. So when most people are dealing with burnout or moral injury, they typically will have a group of people that come together and support them. They find commonalities. Not only was that not happening and is not happening for current group practice owners who are independent without funds, but they are also being insulted, criticized, verbally abused at times, and threatened. So every day was a new opportunity for someone who was really steeped in fear to turn into anger, hurl a final criticism as a last, I'll show you, right before logging off. And they could do this company-wide. Nobody cared that insurers had kept us tied up for months, or that we were dealing with denials and delays and clawbacks. And that was the reason why we were asking to only pay when the insurance company paid. They didn't care that cash flow wasn't in my control anymore. They needed a villain, and I was the one standing closest. And in the course of the system, I realized if you work in a group practice, especially in the mental health field, you become a vicarious bad guy for the insurance company eventually. And this is by design. It's impossible to get a hold of anyone from the insurance company if you've ever tried to call. And so you become the vicarious employee of the insurance company when someone's trying to call you and a patient's trying to call you. If you have to explain their deductible or copay, you become the person who's created that policy when you've had nothing to do with that policy. All you're there doing is communicating to them their policy set forth by the insurance company. And as the employer, you became the vicarious fall guy for the insurance company. When the claims started to freeze and weren't being paid, were being held up by delays, denials, and clawbacks, you were the person standing closest in the employee's eyes, not the insurance company. So the payers created the injury, but we absorbed the blame. This practice did not just become hard or difficult. It became a place where I was constantly being miscast as the lone enemy by the very people I was trying to protect. I had nowhere to turn. And that's when burnout stopped being a phase and became this identity shift. I didn't just step out of the chair I haven't practiced in years, not because I stopped caring, but because my body and my mind were starting to associate the very thing I had to help this world as now a threat. When I say that, I think about the larger impact. I think about the people who virtue signal about our country's mental health broken system and how if we just valued mental health care, everything would be better. And I wish they could see how hard it was to be a mental health provider in this world right now. There's no coincidence that our mental health care system is broken as a result. So let me say this to a listener who is in this right now. If your work has quietly started to feel dangerous, if your heart races every time you open the portal, if you find yourself avoiding calls you used to handle with ease, if you stare at your inbox like it's a predator, if you fantasize about disappearing and then feel guilty for it, it doesn't mean you're broken. It means your nervous system is doing exactly what nervous systems do when they've been placed in prolonged threat. It's not a personal deficiency. It's a predictable outcome of the environment. So what happened next wasn't strategic. It wasn't a plan. My system was long off the axis of making strategic plans anymore and purely in fight or flight. It was the nervous system doing what they do when it's been in danger too long. And I just started disappearing. It was not in some dramatic I quit way. It was in this instinctive, animalistic way. I started to notice that I shut off my notifications on my phone. And it wasn't like I was thinking, I'm going to protect my nervous system today. I just could not deal with it anymore. The level of dings and what each ding signaled to my nervous system, which was usually, we've got bad news. The voicemails started to pile up. The patients, where's my report? I had my intake weeks ago. The threats, the employees saying, hey, I'd like to have a meeting. All of that fell on me. So eventually, the voicemails I stopped paying attention to. And then eventually the emails, the same thing. I couldn't. I couldn't go back in. And it wasn't, again, this like overarching strategy. It wasn't like I'm here to repair my nervous system. It was literally every day I was like, I can't do that. And I would get calls. Well, I left you a voicemail. You didn't get your voicemail, or I sent you an email. And I just thought, if you only knew how many people just need me to get back to them. It's too much. It's too much for one person to handle. And I'm just talking about the career. I'm not even talking about what it's like to be a mom of 3 kids where you have teacher notifications and sports notifications and all of that stuff that go along with it. So as you can imagine, email became bankrupt, voicemail became bankrupt. I just shut down everything. I just shut down to the point that my husband became annoyed and irritated because I couldn't even hear when he texted me anymore. The kids couldn't get a hold of me. All voicemails were now going to Google voicemail and nobody could get a hold of me. In fact, if you look on my website right now, there is a page on drcolleenlong.com/I'm sorry. Every single email has an auto signature that redirects people to this page that basically just says, I'm sorry. I don't know if it's me or this age that we're living in, but it's the age of too much. And I can't do it all. And so I just have to shut it down, if at least for a little bit. In my office, you'll see, if you're looking at the video version here, it's very dark in here. And it's daylight outside. I live in California. It's beautiful. The weather's usually beautiful. But the daylight in some ways signaled the week ahead that I could not control. And I just couldn't do it anymore. And so my office has been dark for a while. And I think that's just sort of another natural inclination to reduce as much sensory input as possible. It's kind of like if you've ever gone into debt or put on a lot of weight. If you go into debt, it's hard for you to even look at your bank accounts, to log into your banking system, or to even make that first initial ding into your bill. Or if you've put on a lot of weight, it's hard to even weigh yourself anymore or look in the mirror. That's where I was at in so many aspects. Most clinicians are familiar with the learned helplessness research, but I'm going to elucidate it a little bit for anybody who is not. So, the original work was with animals, and they would expose this particular group to these aversive shocks that were inescapable. No matter what the animal did, the shock kept coming. Another group experienced a shock that they could actually stop by taking an action. So then later, both of those groups were put in this new situation where escape was easy, the door was right there, and control was suddenly available. The animals who had learned that the shocks were uncontrollable didn't even try. They just stopped looking for the exit and lay there, absorbed by it, not because they couldn't escape, but because their nervous system had already learned nothing I do changes the outcome. I also think about Kurt Richter's work with rats. He put rats in a bucket of water they couldn't get out of. At first, they fought like hell. They swam, they clawed, they searched for the wall. And then after about 15 minutes, they just stopped. They just went still and they drowned. Here's the part that haunts me. When Richter pulled some of them out right before they went under, dried them off, let them rest for a minute, and then put them back in, those same rats swam for hours. Not because their muscles changed all of a sudden, but because the experiment changed what their nervous system believed was possible. They had a reason to hope there was rescue, so they kept going. That's the part that I unfortunately relate to so well, and I'm sure so many others do. Because what those months, which eventually turned into a year, taught me and my body was the same lesson the bucket taught them. There is no wall, there is no rescue. Nothing you do changes the outcome. Every time I tried to fix it, another denial, clawback, another portal frozen, another employee's resignation, another legal threat, another month of cash flow, a board complaint I couldn't control. So eventually my system just stopped fighting, not consciously or dramatically, just quietly, the way the bodies do when they don't believe escape is possible anymore. Okay, so even while my nervous system was shutting down, there was some other part of me, this survival part that's still in the very, very depths going, I see the writing on the wall. Around July of 2024, I put the practice up for sale. And if you've ever lived through M&A, mergers and acquisitions, you know that it's never a straightforward line. It's hope and grief on a roller coaster. There's a million negotiations, a million pivots. It's ups and downs. There's last minute retrades. There's uncertainty right up until that ink is dry. I was now in a field that I definitely did not feel comfortable navigating. I knew nothing about acquisitions, letters of intent, vetting buyers, putting together a legal or tax strategy team. I was entirely out of my element, but it was the only escape. And so I put together a good list of about 50 to 60 interested buyers, vetted them all, narrowed it down to about 10 to 15. And then from there, over time, was able to get down to 2 or 3 and then negotiated that. And I want to say that was about, there were certainly some ups and downs there. And in December, we lost the deal, came back in February, March, got it back, and closed in July of this year. That close was the only way out. I don't know what would have happened other than I would have lost my house had I kept going. I was at a point where making payroll was just, it was an impossibility, and just started to seep more and more into debt to where there was no more debt to take on. I didn't actually know what was going to happen. I remember speaking with bankruptcy attorneys and thinking, all right, well, you guys have been here in these dire situations. Like, what do I do? Like, I have this debt. I've been paying these employees. Clearly, insurance company's not going to pay. My house is on the line. What do people do in this situation? They were like, fuck, I don't know. Like, I guess you lose your house. So being acquired was a godsend. It was a blessing. And it was something that, had it not occurred, I'm still not sure where we would be. This is the part that scares me to so many others that are trying to still do this on their own in today's day and age. The practice now is doing great as a result of this new buyer. And the difference isn't talent. It's not that this person is more caring somehow. Capital. The buyer had enough capital to hire a whole marketing team, reputation management team, a brand new building, with a practice manager front and center. The buyer could afford a CFO to predict when these glaciers were going to fall and coming before they hit. The buyer could absorb the employee grifters that take advantage of small businesses. The buyer could hire the reputation management company. They could build the layers that independent practices are forced to be without. The buyer could build the infrastructure that would make this practice sustainable once again. And the buyer didn't have to do this all on their own. The buyer had enough capital to pay clinicians consistently without wondering when the insurance money was going to come in. The buyer had enough capital to hire a third party to negotiate on their behalf with these insurance companies to get the fee structures up. That's not a moral difference. It's not even a business acumen. It's just capital. And so that's what worries me for the thousands of people out there who are still trying to do all of this and wear all the hats on their own in a game that is shifting more quickly than ever. So that's where we go next. How do we rebuild relevance and freedom in a world that is changing so fast? How do we leverage technology instead of being steamrolled by it? How do we stop confusing martyrdom with meaning? Because I'm not interested in a comeback that puts me right in the same battlefield, that lets me keep serving without my nervous system paying for it with my life, or at the least, my house. And when I say that infrastructure that the private buyer and venture capital can afford decides who lives in this new game, I'm not just talking about who survives as a business. I'm talking about who survives as a human. Because when you don't have that capital, you become the infrastructure. Your body becomes the buffer. Your nights become the margin. Your house, your kids, your marriage become that emergency fund. And nobody cares that you're dipping into it other than you and your family. That's not sustainable. Not for a practice, not for a generation of humans who went into debt financially already and chronologically to become a healer. So part of my recovery became this question. What if the goal isn't to stay in this chair at all cost? What if the goal is to keep my calling alive in a form my body can actually survive? Because I don't want to stop being a psychologist. I just want to stop dying as one. So the pivot, if I couldn't buy myself the kind of infrastructure private equity or venture capital can buy a company, I had to build a version of it for myself. And here's where I think some of that visionary thinking always does once survival mode lets us go for a second. I was able to start suspending reality again. Like, what if I throw away every old inherited rule about what it means to be a psychologist in practice? What if I stop asking, how do I stay relevant inside the chair long enough to survive? And start asking, how do I use my expertise as a moat in ways that weren't even possible 5 years ago? I know we always talk about the downside of AI and technology, and a lot of us sit with dread wondering what that's going to look like. But there is so much good that is also being created simultaneously. This meritocracy where any of us can create so many of the things that were unthinkable 5 years ago. Like, I can create a passive Etsy empire built on tools only a clinician would even know how to make. Worksheets, protocols, cognitive scaffolds, nervous system maps, family scripts, what to say when you're drowning guides, stuff that lives inside our brains because we spent years in academia and in the clinical room. That knowledge used to just die inside libraries and supervisor notebooks. Now it can become products that help people while I sleep. It doesn't require me to be in the chair one-to-one, now one-to-many. I can build a membership community. I can vibe code an entire union and marketplace for clinicians by clinicians without needing a computer science degree or a $200,000 development team. I mean, fuck, I paid 10 grand for a website to be built in 2004. Now I can have AI spin one up in 3 seconds. The learning gap that used to keep people like me outside of building tech just collapsed. And it's not just apps and products. I can turn this camera and speak the truth. And with enough reps or practice rounds, that truth starts landing in the ears and bodies of people who have felt alone for decades. It builds a following not because I'm branding myself, but because validation is medicine. And so many clinicians are starving for it. I can start to leverage a YouTube channel like a living self-help library. Millions of people getting our expertise on call, the way they used to rely on a book that might find them in a Barnes & Noble 10 years ago. Except now they don't have to wait for Random House to pick that expert and have said expert get their advance and then publish their book. They don't have to wait for a media gatekeeper to decide what expert is worth the spotlight. Dr. Ruth, then Dr. Drew, Mehmet Oz, they had to wait for this network to open the door. Dr. Oz had to wait on Oprah. Dr. Phil had to wait on Oprah. Dr. Drew had to wait on MTV, to decide that somehow what they were saying warranted the attention of many. Now that barrier is no longer there. It doesn't exist. You can use AI to break all of the technological barriers that once existed. You can use it to outline and expand your books, to build tools, to publish faster, quicker, to get your ideas into the world in an hour instead of a decade, hoping someone discovers you. Before, these were just far-off dreams. Now they're accessible pathways. This is a true meritocracy for the nimble, the creative, the clinicians who are willing to rethink the chair as the only arena where our value can live and survive. So that's what tech and AI became for me. And one reason I think I get so passionate when talking about it, it's not a way for us to throw away those hard-earned degrees and experience. It's a way to stop being trapped inside the narrow old versions of ourselves, of what draconian grad schools taught us we were supposed to be. It's a way to turn our expertise into leverage and our voices into impact. And most importantly, our livelihoods into something our nervous systems can survive and sustain. Because I believe the future doesn't belong to the people who can white knuckle the old system the longest or who can grind the hardest. It belongs to people who can reinvent the work without losing themselves. So I'm done trying to shrink myself back into the chair or the old mode of trading my time for one, and instead leveraging current AI and technology to give that expertise to many. And that's why this show is called Off the Chair. Off the chair doesn't mean we don't value therapy. It doesn't mean clinical work is beneath us. It means we are done believing that suffering is the only price of legitimacy. It means that we're stepping out of a model that says your worth equals your hours or your billable codes. Your ethics equal your exhaustion, and your calling requires your collapse. Off the chair is me saying, I'm keeping the calling, I'm ditching the martyrdom, because the future belongs to the people who can adapt without losing their soul. And I'm not willing to let a hellscape bent on replacing clinicians be the final word on my career. So what I hope to share next in these next months, maybe years, is what reinvention looks like for us all. How I'm using technology to build leverage, preserve my nervous system, and create a way of practicing and teaching and contributing that doesn't require me to drown or sacrifice my house or my family or anything else for that matter. So it's not a comeback, but it's a redesign. All right, if you made it this far, thank you. I know this was personal, and this 3-part series was a lot. But I hope it didn't feel like a spectacle. I hope it felt real, relatable, messy in the way that real collapse is messy. And more than anything, I hope it validated you, because so many clinicians are sitting in silence right now thinking they're the only one struggling, the only one failing, the only one who can't keep up. And you're not. You're not broken. You're not weak. You're surviving inside a system that injures good people and then calls it burnout. If this episode gave you even a drop of, oh my God, I'm not alone, then it served its purpose. And I hope it restored something else too. Hope. Not the naive kind, the useful kind. The kind that knows the old game is dying, but the new landscape can be a doorway for us, not a threat. That's why this whole podcast exists. Because staying in the chair forever isn't noble if the chair sits inside a system that keeps injuring us. That's not professionalism. That's self-harm with a license. Off the chair isn't about leaving the field. It's about refusing to disappear inside of it. It's about refusing to be cannibalized by it. It's about building futures our nervous systems can survive. Next week, I'm starting a hibernation, reset the nervous system, grounded in real science, ridiculously practical for anyone still in the chair but quietly drowning. So stay with me. Over the next few episodes, and especially throughout the month of December, we're going to be talking about what has to happen before you beautiful butterflies break out of your cocoon. The breaking free part is often a fight. I mean, if you think about like the science of the butterfly breaking out or a crucible when it's being made, it has to be heated to these intense temperatures. There has to be this intense tension for things to change immensely. But the ability to fight comes from repair. So the month of December, we're talking all about repair and what that looks about. We're going to talk about hibernation. We're going to talk about the nervous system. And for all of you clinicians that are like, oh, I know what I'm supposed to do. I'm just supposed to do yoga and some self-care and some journaling. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about real deep system healing. So stick with us. And hopefully many of you will get the reset button you need this season. If this resonated, come back. Bring a colleague who needs it. Let's stop surviving in silence. I'm Dr. Colleen Long. This is Off the Chair. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Leave a review if this hit something raw. Share it with another clinician who's still sprinting. Until next time, rest, regulate, and rebel responsibly. Okay, let's be honest. Everyone gets slammed with the hit like and subscribe thing, and we scroll past because it's become meaningless noise. But here's the psychology of why following, subscribing, and hitting that bell will help you more than it helps me. You already have the big ideas. You have the Sunday night vision, the I'm changing everything plan, and then Monday hits and the week swallows you back into survival mode. That's not a character flaw. It's how human behavior works. Research in habit science shows that most of what we do every day is driven by cues in our environment, not by our best intentions. If the cue doesn't show up, the behavior doesn't happen. And the FOG behavior model makes it painfully simple. For any behavior to happen, you need motivation, ability, and a prompt at the same moment. Prompts are the missing piece for people who already care and already know what to do. So when you hit follow and turn on those notifications, you're not just doing me a favor, you're installing a weekly prompt, an automation that interrupts that weekly grind long enough to remind you the new future you are getting ready to build. Think of this show as your cue to come up for air. Hit follow, tap the bell, let the reminder work for you. Because change isn't built on intention alone. It requires systems. So here's your 1-minute action step. If you're on YouTube, look right under this video and hit subscribe, then tap that little bell next to it so you get a reminder when a new episode drops. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcast, hit follow. It's usually at the top of the show page, and turn on notifications if it asks. If you're on Instagram, go to @OffTheChairPodcast, hit follow and tap the bell in the top right to get weekly alerts. And if you want the community, search Off the Chair Community on Facebook and hit join group. It's free and we'll welcome you in.